The data packet came in at 0347 station time, and by 0415 my communicator was screaming. I was not asleep. Nobody really sleeps well on Concord 9. The station hums at a frequency that sits just below what most species can hear, but humans catch it. We always catch it. It lives somewhere behind your molars and reminds you, every hour of every cycle, that you are floating in deep space, inside a structure built by people who have 6 fingers, and consider personal space an outdated concept. I had been lying on my bunk staring at the ceiling when Archivist Thesavar's message arrived. It said, simply, "Please come to Sublevel 4. I believe there has been a misunderstanding, and I would like a human to explain it before I submit my report." That last part should have warned me. Thesavar never waited to submit anything. The Yelm were famously precise. They filed reports the way other species breathed, automatically and without thinking. I pulled on my uniform, ran a hand through my hair and went. My name is Owen Calloway. I am 34 years old, originally from a small city in northern England, and I hold the title of Cultural Liaison, 3rd grade, for the human delegation to the Galactic Council. My job is to sit in rooms and explain things. I explain why humans shake hands instead of touching foreheads. I explain why we use the word fine to mean both good and terrible depending on tone. I explain why a gift of fresh flowers, which most species consider an offering of biological decay, is actually considered romantic on Earth. I am very good at my job. I have never, in 4 years aboard this station, been unprepared for a question. I was completely unprepared for what Thesavar showed me that morning. Sublevel 4 was the records archive, a long corridor of pale blue light and humming data towers where the Yelm spent most of their working hours in a state of focused contentment. Thesavar was waiting at the entrance, and the moment I saw their face, I knew something was genuinely wrong. The Yelm had wide, amber-colored eyes that were usually half-lidded, calm, unhurried. Thesavar's eyes were open all the way. On a Yelm, that was the equivalent of a human, standing on a table and shouting. "Owen Calloway," they said, using my full name, which they only did when they were being formal. "Thank you for coming. I want you to look at this document and tell me what it is." They projected a file into the air between us. It was a standard United Nations submission form, the kind that Earth had been filing with the Council since formal membership began 40 years ago. The header read, "Voluntary Military Asset Disclosure, Category Summary, filed by United Nations Office of Interstellar Affairs, Year of Filing, 2019. I looked at it. I felt something cold move through my chest. "Thesavar," I said carefully, "where did you find this?" "It was included in the batch of historical records your delegation submitted last quarter. Cultural heritage materials, I believe the classification was. Artwork, music, literature, scientific papers." Thesavar paused. "And this, it was filed inside a folder labeled Administrative Documents, Miscellaneous." I stared at the form. Someone in the UN Records Office had made a very significant clerical error. The voluntary military disclosure was supposed to go to a completely different department, one that processed it quietly, reviewed it in private, and filed it away in a secure archive that most council species pretended did not exist. Instead, it had been bundled in with a collection of Beethoven symphonies and agricultural history papers and handed directly to the most meticulous archivists in the known galaxy. "I need you to explain these categories to me," Thesavar said. "I have translated the words, but the meanings are not clear. For example, this term, main battle tank." They highlighted the line. "A tank, in the Council's universal lexicon, refers to a sealed container for holding liquid. I do not understand how a container for liquid can be classified under armed ground vehicles, with a notation of approximately 6,000 active units." I took a slow breath. "It is not that kind of tank," I said. "I assumed as much. Please explain." So I did. I started from the beginning, the way you explain things to someone who has never needed to understand them before, which was exactly what Thesavar was. I explained that a main battle tank was a large, armored vehicle that moved on continuous tracks instead of wheels, that it carried a large caliber gun capable of firing solid projectiles or explosive rounds at high velocity over significant distances, and that it was designed specifically to destroy other armored vehicles and fortified positions while protecting the crew inside from incoming fire. Thesavar listened with the total, motionless attention that Yelm gave to information they found important. When I finished, they were quiet for a moment. Then they said, "You built a machine whose entire purpose is to move toward danger and destroy things." "Yes," I said. "And you have 6,000 of them." "Roughly. That figure is from 2019, so it is a little out of date." Thesavar looked at the document again. "There are more categories." "Yes," I said again. "There are more categories." They scrolled down. I watched the list go by and felt the strange, floating sensation of seeing your own civilization from the outside for the first time. Artillery systems, self-propelled howitzers, multiple rocket launch systems, armored personnel carriers, attack helicopters. I explained each one. Thesavar listened to each one. The archive was very quiet. Then we reached the naval section, and Thesavar stopped scrolling. "Aircraft carrier," they read aloud. "A vessel carrying approximately 70 to 90 fixed-wing aircraft and rotary aircraft, with a crew of approximately 5,000 personnel, capable of projecting military force across oceanic distances." They looked at me. "This is a ship." "Yes." "A ship that carries other vehicles inside it." "On it, mostly. On the deck." "And the vehicles it carries are themselves armed." "Heavily armed, yes." Thesavar was quiet for 3 full seconds. On a Yelm, 3 seconds of silence was a significant event. "How many of these vessels does Earth currently operate?" I thought about how to answer that. The 2019 figure was 11. The current figure was, to my knowledge, still 11, though I would have needed to check. I told Thesavar 11. The archivist made a sound I had never heard a Yelm make before. It was very soft, and it might have been the sound their species made when they encountered something they had no existing category for. 11. They repeated. "Yes." "Owen Calloway," Thesavar said slowly. "I must now file this document with the Security Oversight Office. It is a military disclosure, and protocol requires it. I wanted to speak with you first because I did not want to cause unnecessary alarm through my own misunderstanding." They paused. "Am I misunderstanding something?" I looked at the document. I looked at the list of categories still waiting below the naval section. I knew what was coming. Ballistic missiles, nuclear submarines, hypersonic test vehicles. The number that, more than anything else on the form, was going to make every delegate on this station go very, very still. "No," I said quietly. "You are not misunderstanding anything." Thesavar nodded once. "Then I will file the report now. I suspect Director Vall will want to speak with you before the morning session." They paused again, looking at me with those wide amber eyes. "I am sorry, Owen Calloway. I did not know this document was in the batch. If I had known, I would have routed it correctly." "It is all right," I told them. It was not all right, but it was not Thesavar's fault, and there was no point in saying so. I walked back to my quarters, sat on the edge of my bunk, and sent a secure message to Ambassador Co Yoon-jae's office. The message said, simply, "The 2019 disclosure form has been seen by the archive staff. I believe we should speak before the morning session." Her reply came back in 4 minutes. It said, "I know. Get some sleep, Owen. We have been ready for this for 15 years." I stared at that message for a long time. Then I lay back on my bunk, listened to the hum of the station, and waited for morning. Director Vall called the emergency session at 07 o'clock. I had not slept. I had spent the hours between Thesavar's report and the summons sitting at my small desk, drinking 2 cups of tea I did not taste, and thinking about the document. Not about its contents, which I knew well. Every human liaison officer was required to be familiar with Earth's military disclosure submissions as part of standard training. We spent 3 days on it during our first orientation week, and our instructor, an older woman named Grace Holden who had spent 20 years in the UN's Interstellar Affairs Division, before moving into the Liaison Corps, had sat us down and said the following words with perfect calm. "At some point in your posting, someone will find out. Your job when that happens is to be steady, be honest, and under no circumstances apologize for what we are." I had thought about that speech many times over 4 years. I had never thought I would actually need it. The Security Oversight Chamber on Concord 9 was on level 7, the highest occupied level of the station. with a curved, transparent ceiling that looked out onto open space. It was a beautiful room under normal circumstances. The stars hung outside it like scattered light on dark water, and on a clear cycle you could see the distant smear of a nebula that the Yelm had named something unpronounceable, and humans called the Blue Curtain. I had attended 3 sessions in this chamber before. All 3 had been routine: trade route reviews, resource allocation discussions, a lengthy debate about communication relay placement that had taken 4 sessions to resolve. This was not routine. Director Vol was already seated when I arrived. She was a Keth, which meant she was tall, blue-gray, and built in a way that suggested the species had evolved specifically to make other species feel physically modest. Vol was the senior Keth on the station and had served as security oversight director for 11 years. In that time, I had seen her express visible surprise exactly once, when a communications malfunction had caused her own voice to echo back at her during a formal address. She had looked mildly startled for perhaps half a second, before returning to perfect composure. She looked startled now, not half a second of it, a sustained, barely controlled kind of startled that she was working hard to keep from her face, and not entirely succeeding. Around the curved table sat representatives from 6 other species. The Yelm delegation included Thesivar, who sat very straight and avoided my eyes. The peer representative, a small, pale creature named Ailey, whose species communicated primarily through shifts in skin color and used spoken language as a secondary system, was a shade of gray I had not seen them turn before. The Durath, the Mavok, the Seln, and the Karath were each present, their expressions ranging from guarded to openly uncomfortable. I was the only human in the room. Ambassador Seo had not yet arrived. "Owen Calloway," Director Vol said as I took my seat. "Thank you for attending. We have reviewed the document filed by Archivist Thesivar, and we have a number of questions. I want to begin by establishing something clearly. Is this document genuine?" "Yes," I said. "It has not been altered or incorrectly translated?" "To my knowledge, no." Vol looked at the floating projection in the center of the table. The document hung in the air between us. "Then I will proceed with questions. The first category listed is Main Battle Tank." She had clearly reviewed my explanation to Thesivar, because she did not ask me to define it again. The document states approximately 6,000 active units across Earth's national military forces as of 2019. Is that figure accurate? "It was accurate at the time of filing," I said. "I would need a current disclosure to give you an updated number." "We will return to that. The next category, Self-Propelled Artillery." She paused. "Your translator AI has rendered this as a vehicle that launches explosive projectiles over significant distances using propellant charges, with the capability to move independently between firing positions." She looked at me. "Is that correct?" "Yes, essentially." "And Earth maintains approximately 4,000 of these." "As of 2019, yes." Vol moved to the next item. She was being methodical, which I respected, and also found increasingly uncomfortable, because I knew what was waiting at the bottom of the list. She worked through the ground vehicle categories first, then moved to aircraft. I explained attack helicopters, which were aircraft that flew relatively low and slow, and were designed to engage targets on the ground. I explained jet fighters, which flew very fast and were designed to destroy other aircraft. I explained strategic bombers, which were very large aircraft, designed to carry large amounts of explosive payload over very long distances. The Mevok representative, whose name was Orf, leaned forward at this point and asked a question. "These aircraft," Orf said, "they carry explosive devices?" "Yes." "And the devices are dropped onto targets below?" "Among other delivery methods, yes." Orva sat back and exchanged a look with the Seln delegate, a tall, thin figure named Israel, that I could not quite read. Vol moved to the naval section. I walked her through the categories the same way I had walked Thesivar through them, step by step. Destroyers, which were fast surface ships designed for multiple combat roles. Frigates. Cruisers. Attack submarines, which operated fully submerged and were designed to locate and destroy both surface ships and other submarines. When I reached the aircraft carrier category, I used the same explanation I had given Thesivar, and the room fell into the same quality of silence. 11, Vol said, when I finished. 11 of these vessels. As of 2019, yes. Each carrying nearly 100 aircraft. In that range, yes. And each aircraft is itself armed. Yes. A lighty, the Pyre representative, changed color again. They had been cycling slowly between pale gray and a faint yellow since I arrived. Now they went to a color I did not have a name for, something between those two, with a blue edge. I made a mental note to ask a peer specialist what that combination meant, then immediately felt that perhaps I did not want to know. I want to clarify something, said Duroth Representative Marin, a broad-shouldered species who communicated with a kind of measured deliberateness that I always found reassuring. These naval vessels, they operate in groups? They can. A carrier strike group typically consists of the carrier itself, supported by a number of escort vessels, destroyers, cruisers, submarines. The exact composition varies. And what is the range of such a group? How far from your planet can they operate? In practical terms, anywhere on Earth's ocean surface. With resupply, they can operate indefinitely. They are designed for sustained independent operation. Marin was quiet for a moment. Earth's oceans cover approximately 71% of the planet's surface area. That is correct. So at any given time, you have the capacity to project significant armed force across 71% of your planet's surface. Across the surface, yes. And below it, with the submarine fleet. The room was very quiet. I could hear the faint hum of the station's environmental systems. Outside the curved ceiling, the stars sat in absolute stillness, indifferent and beautiful. Director Vall set down the stylus she had been holding and looked at me directly. We have not yet addressed the final section of the document, she said. Strategic and nuclear assets. No, I said, we have not. There was a quality to her voice that I had not heard from Vall before. She was not afraid. Exactly. The Keth did not read as afraid. But there was something in how she held the words, carefully, the way you hold something that might be fragile, or might be dangerous and you have not yet determined which. I would like to address it now, she said. I nodded. Of course. She scrolled the document to the final section. The heading appeared in the projection between us. She read the first line aloud. Nuclear warhead stockpile. She paused. The number listed here. Is this a total count or an active deployment count? Total count, I said. That includes both active warheads and those held in reserve or scheduled for decommissioning. 13,214. Approximately, yes. Again, the figure is from 2019. There it was. The number I had known was coming since I first saw the document hanging in the archive. Not the tanks, not the carriers, not the aircraft. This number. Because every other item on the list was a tool with a specific, limited purpose. This number was something different. This number was a civilization saying, very quietly and very clearly, that it had thought about the worst possible thing and prepared for it with meticulous, industrial thoroughness. Vall looked at the number for a long time without speaking. Then she looked at me. Are these weapons capable of destroying a city? A large one, yes, depending on the yield. And these are the stockpile figures for one planet. Yes. One planet which, at the time of this filing, had not yet achieved faster-than-light travel. That is correct. Another silence. This one lasted longer. I became aware that several people around the table were not looking at the document anymore. They were looking at me. Not with hostility. Something closer to the way you look at something when you have just realized you have badly, fundamentally miscalculated its nature. I knew that look. I had seen it on my first week aboard this station, when a Yelm colleague had asked me about Earth's history of large-scale conflict, and I had explained the 20th century. That same look, the recalibration behind the eyes. I would like to request, Vall said at last, a current military disclosure from the human delegation. Updated figures, current assets. I will make that request through Ambassador Co's office, I said. There is a classification review process, but I can ask that it be expedited. Please do so. I pulled out my communicator and sent the message to CO's office. The reply came back in under a minute. Request acknowledged. Updated disclosure will be transmitted through secure channel within 6 hours. The ambassador will arrive at the chamber within the hour. I read the message aloud to the table. Nobody responded immediately. Then Ailey, the peer delegate, spoke. Their voice was thin and careful, and they had settled on a flat, neutral white color that I knew from experience meant they were attempting to conceal their emotional state. Owen Calloway, they said, I have one question, and I want you to answer it honestly. Of course, I said. These weapons, all of these weapons, the vehicles, the aircraft, the ships, the warheads. Ailey paused. Who were they built to be used against? The question sat in the air of the chamber. Outside, the stars did not move. The blue curtain nebula hung in its distant stillness, entirely unconcerned. I could have given a diplomatic answer. I had been trained to give diplomatic answers. I could have said something about deterrence theory, about the strategic balance of power, about how the presence of significant military capability on all sides of a conflict reduces the likelihood of that conflict occurring. All of that was true. All of that was the correct, careful, professional answer. Instead, I told the truth. Each other, I said. Nobody spoke. Humanity built these assets over the course of several centuries, I said, keeping my voice steady. They were built by individual nations, for use against other individual nations, in conflicts over land, resources, political power, and ideology. Many of them were never used. Their existence was itself the point. If everyone has enough to destroy everyone else, then destroying everyone else becomes a very unattractive option. Ailey's skin had gone a color I had never seen before. It was not on any chart I had studied. You built all of this, Marin said slowly, to use against yourselves. Against each other, yes, though we did not always manage to avoid using it. Earth has a significant history of large-scale conflict. And yet, Vol said, you are here. Your species survived. Yes. Despite possessing the capacity to destroy yourselves many times over. Yes. Vol picked up her stylus again. She held it the way someone holds something when they need their hands to be doing something simple, while their mind works on something very complicated. We will recess for 1 hour, she said, and then we will continue this discussion when the ambassador arrives. I nodded and stood. As I moved toward the door, Marin called after me. Owen Calloway, they said. I turned. Marin looked at me steadily. Your species has been a member of this council for 40 years. In that time, no human representative has ever referenced this capability. No human delegate has ever mentioned it in any session, any discussion, any private meeting. A pause. Was that intentional? I thought about Ambassador Seo's message. 15 years. Ready for 15 years. I think, I said, that you would need to ask the ambassador that question. I walked out of the chamber, into the corridor, and stood with my back against the wall for a moment with my eyes closed. Outside the station, the galaxy continued its slow, enormous business, entirely without reference to what had just happened in that room. It was 0917. The updated disclosure would arrive in approximately 5 hours and 40 minutes. I went to find coffee, because some things do not change regardless of what star system you are in. The updated disclosure arrived 4 hours and 52 minutes later, not 6 hours. Someone in the classification office had worked fast. I was still in the small staff lounge on level 5 when my communicator vibrated. I had been sitting across from Grace Holden, who had come aboard on the early shuttle that morning the moment she received word of the situation. Grace was 61 years old, had white hair cut very short, and moved through the station with the unhurried confidence of someone who had already imagined every possible version of a crisis, and found that none of them were particularly surprising. She had been the one who taught my orientation class 4 years ago. When I sent word of the situation, her reply had been, "On my way. Do not say anything that requires apologizing for later." She was drinking tea. I was not drinking anything anymore, because my hands had developed a slight, persistent tremble that I did not want anyone to see. "They are going to ask you to read it aloud," Grace said when I showed her the notification. "In session. That is standard protocol for a new disclosure. You will be the voice of the document." "I know. When you reach the hypersonic section, read slowly. Give them time to process each item before you move to the next. And when I reach the autonomous systems section," Grace looked at me over the rim of her tea, "read slowly there too. Ambassador Seo Yun-jae arrived at the lounge 12 minutes before the session was due to resume. She was not what people expected when they met her for the first time. She was a small woman, perhaps 60 years old, with close-cropped gray hair, and the kind of face that expressed exactly as much as she intended, and nothing more. She had spent 8 years as a general in the Korean Army before transitioning to diplomatic service, and then 15 years working in the UN's Interstellar Affairs Division before her appointment to Concord 9. She wore the standard diplomatic uniform with no decorations, though I knew from her file that she had earned several. She sat down, looked at the updated disclosure on my communicator screen, and nodded once. "The session resumes in 10 minutes, she said. "Owen, you will read the document. I will answer questions about policy and context. Grace, you will take notes and signal me if you believe I am about to say something strategically inadvisable." She paused. "That last instruction is primarily for the Autonomous Systems section." "Understood," Grace said. The security oversight chamber was fuller when we returned. In the hour of recess, word had spread through the station, the way significant news always spread on Concord 9. Quickly, and with the particular quality of intensity that comes when people are trying to be calm about something that is making them not calm. 3 additional delegates had arrived to observe. The Kareth had brought a second representative. Ailey, the peer delegate, had brought what appeared to be a cultural specialist, a narrow-faced individual who sat slightly behind Ailey and watched the room with wide, careful eyes. Director Val called the session to order at exactly 14 o'clock. She introduced Ambassador Seo with formal protocol language, and Seo responded with equal formality. Then Val looked at me. "Owen Calloway, the human delegation has provided an updated military disclosure document. Please read it for the record." I opened the file. I looked at the first line. I thought about Grace's instruction. "Read slowly," I began. The opening categories were the ones the session had already addressed. Updated figures for ground vehicles and aircraft and naval assets. The tank figure had changed slightly. The carrier group figure was the same. I read each number clearly and moved on. Then I reached the section that had not been in the 2019 document. The section that existed because the past 7 years had not stood still. Hypersonic glide vehicles, I read. Operational units, classified. General capability description. Atmospheric glide vehicles capable of sustained hypersonic flight, defined as flight exceeding 5 times the speed of sound, with maneuvering capability that renders interception by conventional defense systems unreliable. I looked up briefly. The room was very still. I looked back down. Maximum range, intercontinental. Payload capacity, conventional or strategic. Israel, the Selm delegate, raised a hand. "Please stop at that entry. I want to understand the interception note." A pause. "You have said these vehicles cannot reliably be intercepted by conventional defense systems. Does that include the defense systems currently deployed by Council member species?" I looked at Ambassador Seo. She gave me a very small nod. "I am not qualified to make a comparative assessment of Council defense systems," I said. "I can tell you that the vehicles are designed to defeat the defense systems that Earth's own militaries operate. Those systems are among the most advanced on the planet." Israel sat back. The Durath representative, Marin, made a note on their datapad. I continued reading. "Rail-based kinetic launch systems," I read. "Operational status, advanced testing and limited deployment. Capability description. Electromagnetic acceleration of projectile masses to velocities significantly exceeding conventional propellant-based systems, with no explosive payload required. Impact energy is derived from kinetic force alone." I paused for 1 second, because the next part of the description was the part that I had read 3 times during the recess, just to make sure I was understanding it correctly. At maximum operational velocity, a standard projectile mass delivers energy on impact equivalent to a small conventional explosive device, without requiring any chemical or nuclear payload. Orv, the Mivok delegate, leaned forward. "It fires metal." "Essentially, yes. And the metal itself is the weapon." "The kinetic energy of the metal is the weapon." "Yes." "Because it is moving fast enough." "Yes." Orv sat back and looked at nothing in particular for a moment. I moved to the next section. Long-range precision strike systems. Capability description. Guided projectile systems capable of striking targets at distances exceeding 2,000 kilometers, with accuracy margins of under 10 meters. I let that land for a second. 10 meters meant something different when you explained it to species whose own targeting systems operated at accuracies measured in city blocks. Current operational range. Global coverage from existing launch platforms. Global coverage, Vol said, meaning any point on Earth's surface can be targeted from any other point? From the appropriate launch platform, yes. Including ocean-based platforms? Yes. She wrote something down. I continued. Autonomous unmanned combat systems, I read, and felt the room shift slightly, some subtle change in the quality of attention the delegates were paying. The word autonomous carried particular weight in interstellar political discussions. The Yeln had banned autonomous weapons systems 300 years ago, following a conflict I had read about in my cultural training, a conflict where the systems had continued operating for 11 years after the political dispute that triggered them had been resolved, because no one had been able to reach the control infrastructure to shut them down. The Council had a formal convention on autonomous weapons. Earth had signed it as a condition of membership. Classification note: current autonomous systems deployed by Earth military forces operate within human-supervised engagement frameworks and do not meet the Council Convention definition of fully autonomous lethal systems. I looked up. Every face in the room was looking at me. However, I continued, because the document required me to continue, and because the document was complete and honest. Research and development into expanded autonomous capability is ongoing in several member nations. The United Nations Office of Interstellar Affairs notes this for transparency purposes and confirms that Earth remains committed to the terms of the Council Convention. There was a silence. How far along, Marin said carefully, is this research? That information is classified above my access level, I said. Ambassador CO may be able to address it in general terms. CO spoke for the first time since the session began. Her voice was clear and steady. The research is ongoing, she said. The relevant programs are subject to international oversight mechanisms. Earth's commitment to the convention is genuine. Our decision to disclose the existence of the research rather than omit it reflects that commitment. Vol looked at her for a long moment. I appreciate that, she said. Which, from Vol, was significant. I returned to the document. The next section was the one I had been thinking about most since the disclosure arrived. The Strategic Weapons section, updated. Strategic Nuclear Assets, I read. Current active warhead count, classified. Declassified range, between 9,000 and 12,000 active units, with additional warheads in reserve or decommissioning status. A pause. Delivery systems include land-based intercontinental ballistic missiles, sea-based ballistic missiles, launched from submarine platforms, and air-delivered gravity bombs and cruise missiles. Another pause. Second strike capability. Confirmed. Earth maintains the capacity to absorb a full-scale strategic attack and deliver a retaliatory response of sufficient magnitude to constitute mutual destruction of the initiating party. I finished reading that section and waited. For a long moment, nobody said anything. Then A. Lee spoke. The peer delegate had been the color of old snow since I entered the room. Second strike capability, A. Lee said. You have ensured that even if your forces are struck first, you can still respond. That is the principle of mutual deterrence, yes. You built a system designed to guarantee that no attack can ever succeed without being answered, yes. And this system, Awaley said slowly, was built by humans to use against other humans. Yes. You built a machine, Ailey said, and their voice was very quiet, that was designed to make your own species afraid to start a war. There was something in how they said it that stopped me from giving a technical answer, because that was exactly what it was. That was the entire point. Generations of strategists and engineers and political thinkers had spent decades building a system whose sole function was to make conflict so catastrophically expensive that even the most aggressive actors would step back from the edge. It was not a weapon in the ordinary sense. It was an argument, a very large, very expensive, very permanent argument that said, we are all still here, therefore we will all continue to be here, because the alternative is unacceptable to everyone. Yes, I said. That is more or less what we built. The chamber was silent for what felt like a long time, but was probably 30 seconds. Israel spoke quietly from the far end of the table. How many conflicts, they asked. Do you believe this system prevented? That was not a question I had expected. I looked at Seo. She gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod that I interpreted as, answer honestly. We do not know, I said. By definition, a deterred conflict does not happen, so it cannot be counted. What we can say is that in the 80 years since these systems were first deployed, Earth has not experienced a conflict between major powers of the scale that occurred before them. Whether that is because of the systems or despite them, or simply because other factors changed as well, is a question historians still debate. Israel considered that. A weapon whose primary success is measured in things that did not happen, they said. Yes. Israel looked at the table. That is, they said at last, a remarkably strange way to approach the problem of peace. We are aware, I said. We did not say it was elegant. Something shifted in the room at that. Not relief, not exactly, but something slightly less rigid. Marin made a sound that on a Durath might have been the equivalent of a short, involuntary exhalation of unexpected understanding. Even Val's posture altered fractionally. I had one more section to read. Emerging and Developmental Systems, I said. This section covers capabilities in research or early deployment phases, not yet classified under established categories. I took a breath. Directed energy platforms, high-power laser systems, currently in shipboard and ground-based testing for close-in defense applications. Developmental status, active. I read through the remaining developmental items. Each one landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water, quietly and with expanding effect. When I finished the last line and set down the communicator, the chamber was absolutely quiet. Outside the ceiling, the stars continued their business. The Blue Curtain Nebula had shifted slightly in the hours since morning, the very slow drift of dust and light across unimaginable distance. Ambassador Seo stood. Director Val, she said, the human delegation thanks this body for receiving this disclosure. We understand that some of what you have heard today may be surprising. We are prepared to answer questions, to discuss the context of these capabilities, and to address any concerns this body has about their implications for Council security. A pause. We are also prepared, should this body consider it appropriate, to discuss a formal framework for mutual defense cooperation. She reached into the inside pocket of her uniform jacket and produced a data card. She set it on the table. I have had that proposal prepared for 15 years, she said. I am glad to finally have a reason to put it on the table. The room looked at the data card. Then it looked at Seo. Then most of it looked at me, as if I was somehow the thing that made the most sense to look at, the ordinary human in the room, the liaison officer who had started his morning being asked about tanks by an archivist who had made a clerical error. I looked back at them steadily, because Grace Holden had told me to be steady, and I intended to be. Director Val picked up the data card. She looked at it for a moment, then she called the recess. They asked me to leave while they deliberated. I found out later that this had been Val's decision, made quietly to the rest of the table during the recess. It was not standard procedure, she apparently acknowledged, but the circumstances were not standard, and she wanted the member species to speak freely, without the sensation of being observed by the subject of the discussion. Ambassador Seo had agreed without hesitation. She told me later that she had expected exactly this, that a closed deliberation was always the likely outcome, and that the content of what happened inside it would determine the next 40 years of humanity's relationship with the rest of the galaxy. No pressure, I said. None at all, she agreed, without a trace of irony. I waited in the anteroom on level 7, just outside the chamber doors. It was a narrow space, lined with benches, and lit by the same soft blue light that ran through most of the station's common areas. A small transparent panel in the wall gave a partial view of open space, a long thin slice of stars and darkness. I sat on the bench nearest the panel and watched the stars and thought about nothing useful. 40 minutes passed. Then the door at the far end of the anteroom opened, and Thessavar came in. The archivist was the last person I had expected. I straightened slightly as they crossed the room, moving with the neat, economical grace that the Yeln always had, as if they were slightly more aware of their own bodies than most species bothered to be. Thessavar, I said, are you not supposed to be in the session? The session has not yet formally resumed, Thessavar said. There is still deliberation. I am not a voting member of the oversight body. I was there as a witness to the document's discovery, but I am not required to remain. They sat on the bench across from me with their hands folded carefully in their lap. I wanted to speak with you. Of course. Thessavar looked at the panel of stars for a moment. I sent you a message this morning, they said, after I filed the report. I said I was sorry. I remember. I want to explain what I meant by that. I did not mean that I regretted filing the report. A disclosure document of military nature has a mandatory routing requirement, and I am bound by protocol to follow it. I filed what I was required to file. They paused. I meant that I was sorry, because I could see from your face, when you looked at that document in the archive, that you understood what was about to happen, and I could see that it was going to be difficult for you. And I filed the report anyway, because that was the right thing to do, and I am sorry that the right thing was also hard. I looked at Thessavar for a moment. Thank you, I said. That is genuinely kind. I am not certain it is kind, they said. It may simply be honest. They were quiet for a moment. May I ask you something? Yes. In the session, when Alili asked you who these weapons were built against, you said each other. You did not hesitate. No. Why not? I would have expected a more considered diplomatic response. I thought about how to answer that. Because hesitating would have been dishonest, and they would have known it. Every species around that table has been reading human nonverbal communication for 40 years. Not perfectly, but well enough. If I had paused, they would have assumed I was constructing a softer version of the truth, and that would have been worse than the truth itself. Thessavar considered that. The truth that your species built instruments of mass destruction to point at yourselves. Yes. That is, Thessavar said, genuinely difficult to understand. I know. I have been thinking about it since this morning. I have read some human history in your delegation's public archive, not military history specifically, but general history. There are a great many conflicts. There are a great many years of conflict. And then there is a long period with fewer conflicts of the largest scale, which corresponds roughly to the development of the most destructive systems. That is a reasonable summary, yes. Thessavar was quiet for a moment. I find it very strange, they said at last. The Yelm resolved our last significant internal conflict approximately 600 years ago. At that point, we redirected all military development toward external threats. Asteroid deflection. Atmospheric containment. Later, when we reached other systems, defense against aggressive species. They folded their hands slightly differently. A small adjustment that I had learned over 4 years meant they were approaching something they found genuinely uncertain. We did not build weapons designed to threaten each other because we had decided we were done threatening each other. That is admirable, I said, and I meant it. Perhaps, Thessavar said, but I want to ask you something honestly. Owen Calloway, and I want you to answer honestly, as you did in the session. I will. Do you believe that humanity will stop threatening itself? It was a question I had thought about before, in various forms, in various quiet hours on this station. It was the question underneath all the other questions, the one that the disclosure document raised and then deliberately left unanswered, because it was not the kind of question that had a clean, documentable answer. I think, I said slowly, that we are trying. I think we are genuinely trying. I think the fact that we are here, 40 years into membership of this council, still existing, still talking, still building diplomatic offices and sending liaison officers to foreign space stations, suggests that a significant part of our species has decided that trying is worth it. I paused. I cannot promise you that we will succeed. We have failed before at things we were trying hard to achieve. But I do not think we are going to stop trying. Thessavar looked at me for a long moment. Then they did something I had never seen a Yelm do outside of a formal greeting ritual. They reached across the space between the benches and placed one long hand very briefly over my folded hands. I hope you are right, they said. They stood and returned to the chamber door. I watched them go and sat with the warmth of that gesture for a moment, which felt unexpectedly important. Then the door at the far end of the anteroom opened again, and a Keth-aide I did not recognize leaned in and said, formally and without expression, The ambassador asks that the cultural liaison and Counselor Grace Holden please return to the chamber. The full council is convening. I stood. My hands had stopped trembling. The full council was convening. I had been on this station for 4 years, and the full council had never convened. The security oversight body held its regular sessions with the standard roster of representatives. The full council, all 12 member species plus associated observers, met for major decisions: constitutional amendments, new membership applications, formal declarations. I walked back to the chamber doors. Grace fell into step beside me from somewhere down the corridor. She did not say anything, but she gave me a single, brief look that I had learned to read over 4 years of knowing her. It meant, "You did well." It also meant, "Be ready for what comes next." We went in. The chamber was almost unrecognizable. Every seat at the curved table was occupied, and there were additional seats that had been brought in around the edges of the room for delegates who had arrived too late to take positions at the main table. I counted quickly. Every member species was present. The Yeln, the Keth, the Pyr, the Durath, the Seln, the Mevok, the Karath. The 4 species whose names I had to remind myself of because I encountered them rarely. And, at the far curve of the table, the human delegation, Ambassador Seo, Grace, and me. Director Val stood at the head of the table. "This session is now a full council convening," she said. "For the record, all member species present. The subject is the reconsideration of the human delegation's strategic classification and the formal review of the Mutual Defense Cooperation proposal submitted by Ambassador Seo Yun-jae." She sat down. She looked at the table with the expression of someone who had spent 3 hours thinking through every possible way to say something and had settled on the simplest version. "I will begin," she said, "by acknowledging that this council has made an error." The room was very quiet. The human species was admitted to the Galactic Council 40 years ago. At that time, they were assessed as a pre-interstellar civilization with significant internal conflicts and no demonstrated capacity for deep space operation. That assessment was accurate at the time. Val paused. What that assessment did not address adequately was the question of what humanity had built during 4,000 years of being exactly the kind of species that needed to build things to survive. We classified them by where they were. We failed to account for what they had become. She looked down at the data card that Ambassador Seo had placed on the table. "The mutual defense proposal has been reviewed by the Oversight Committee during this recess. It is thorough, detailed, and demonstrates a degree of strategic thinking that I will be honest in saying surprised several members of this body." She looked at Seo directly. "Ambassador, how long did it take to prepare this proposal?" "The first complete draft was written 9 years ago," Seo said. "It has been revised and updated annually since then." Val looked at her for a moment. 9 years. "Yes. Before you had any specific indication that this council would be receptive to such a proposal." "Hope and preparation are not the same thing, Director," Seo said. "We prepared because we believed it was the right framework. We hoped it would eventually be welcome." Val looked at the data card for another moment. "It is welcome," she said. And then, to the full council, "I am calling a vote on 2 resolutions. The first, the reclassification of the human delegations standing within this council, from associate strategic partner to full strategic partner, with full membership on the Security Oversight Committee. The second, the acceptance of the Mutual Defense Cooperation Framework as submitted, subject to a 6-month review and amendment process with full council participation." She looked around the table. "I will take objections before the vote." There was a pause, the kind of pause that stretches because it is carrying weight. Then Ailey raised one hand. The peer delegate had returned to a pale amber color, which I knew from my training meant something close to cautious but willing. "I have a question," Ailey said. "Not an objection. For the ambassador." Seo nodded. "You have been on this station for 15 years, Ailey said. "You carried that proposal for 9 of them. All of that time, humanity's capability was the same as what we have just learned today. All of that time, you could have revealed it. You could have used it as leverage. You could have used it to demand a better seat at this table." A pause. "Why did you not?" Ambassador Seo looked at Ailey for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but completely clear, the kind of voice that does not need volume because it already knows it will be heard. "Because," she said, We were not trying to frighten you into accepting us. We were trying to be worth accepting. She paused. There is a difference. We believed it mattered. The room was still. Then Marin, the Durath representative, spoke. No objections, Marin said. Nobody else spoke. Val called the vote. Both resolutions passed. The first, on reclassification, was unanimous. Every member species voted yes. I had not expected unanimous. I had allowed myself to hope for a strong majority, and Grace had quietly suggested to me during the recess that we would likely need to work through a prolonged negotiation before any formal agreement was reached. The word unanimous, when Val announced it, produced a sensation in my chest that I was not entirely prepared for. Not pride exactly. Something older than pride. Something closer to relief. The deep kind. The kind that comes after a long tension you have been carrying so long you forgot it was there. The second resolution, on the mutual defense framework, passed with 10 in favor, 1 abstention, and 1 minor procedural objection from the Karath delegation, that their primary legal representative would need to review the language of Section 4 before final ratification. Val accepted the objection and noted it for the review process. The framework was accepted, subject to amendment, yes, and to 6 months of negotiation that would undoubtedly be complicated and occasionally frustrating, but accepted. Ambassador CO sat very still through the vote count. When Val announced the final tallies, CO gave a single, small nod. The kind of nod you give when something you worked toward for a very long time has finally, quietly, arrived. I watched it happen, and thought about the 9 years she had carried that proposal, updating it every year, keeping it current, never knowing when or whether the moment would come. After the session formally closed, the chamber did not empty immediately. The usual post-session dispersal, where delegates moved quickly and with purpose to their next obligations, did not occur. Instead, people stood in loose groupings, moving between them, speaking. Some came to the human delegation. A Yeln council member whose name I had to check against my internal notes, Levon, crossed the room to speak with Grace, and the two of them had a conversation I could not hear but that lasted nearly 10 minutes and seemed, from the expressions involved, to be genuinely substantive. Marin, the Durath delegate, shook hands with Ambassador CO, the old Earth greeting that most council species had learned as a matter of cultural courtesy over 40 years of membership. The handshake between them was slightly formal, the careful quality of someone performing a gesture they know intellectually, but have not done many times. But Marin held it for a full second before releasing. Aeli came to speak with me. They approached carefully, with the measured movements of the peer in formal settings, and stopped about an arm's length away, which was a respectful peer distance. Their skin had settled into a warm color that my training logs associated with a state of considered openness, a willingness to engage with something complex and unfamiliar. Owen Calloway, Ailey said. Ailey, I said. I want to tell you something. A pause. When I asked who those weapons were built against, and you said each other, I was frightened. Another pause. Longer. I want you to know that I am no longer frightened. Or rather, I am still somewhat frightened. But it is a different kind of frightened. I looked at them steadily. What kind? Before your answer, I was frightened because I did not understand what humanity was. The capability seemed random, purposeless, pointing in every direction at once. A species that builds weapons without a clear external target seemed to me like a threat with no predictable direction. Aeli's color shifted through something complex and brief. But after you explained the logic of deterrence, and after the ambassador explained why you waited, I realized I was wrong about what I was looking at. You are not a threat without direction. You are a species that has been engaged in a very long, very difficult argument with itself about whether it wants to exist peacefully, and you have been building progressively larger reminders of the cost of the alternative. A pause. That is still frightening. But it is frightening in a way I can understand. I thought about that for a moment. I think that is the most accurate description of Earth's military history that I have ever heard, I said, and I want you to know I mean that genuinely. Ailey's skin warmed fractionally. The reason I voted yes, they said, was because of one specific thing. Not the capability, not the proposal. It was the 9 years. The ambassador carried a proposal for 9 years that she never used as a weapon, when she clearly could have. A pause. A species that has that kind of discipline, that can sit on that kind of leverage for 9 years, and simply wait, because they want to be worthy of acceptance, rather than demanding it, is a species that has learned something important about power. They looked at me steadily. I hope you continue learning it. So do I said. Ailey gave a single, small inclination of their head, which was the pure equivalent of a nod, and moved away. I stood near the wall for a while, watching the room. The stars outside the ceiling had shifted again, the slow rotation of the station bringing a different section of sky into view. The Blue Curtain Nebula had moved to the edge of the panel, and beyond it was a darkness cut through with more light than I could count. Grace appeared at my elbow. She handed me a cup of tea from somewhere, materialized from the station's small catering system that was tucked into an alcove near the chamber entrance. I had not known the alcove was there. Apparently Grace had. "Well?" she said. "Well," I agreed. We stood together for a moment, watching the room. "Director Vall is going to want you at the First Amendment session," Grace said. "She will want a human liaison present through the full 6 months of framework review. That means you are not going anywhere for a while." I was not planning to go anywhere. "Good." She sipped her tea. "You did well today, Owen. I want you to know that. You read that document without flinching, you answered questions honestly when honesty was the harder choice, and you trusted the people in this room to handle what they were hearing." A pause. "That is not a small thing." "I was frightened," I said. "For most of it." "I know. That is part of why it was not small." She looked at the room. "Fear and function are not incompatible. That is something humanity figured out a very long time ago, and has been applying, with varying degrees of success, ever since." Ambassador CO joined us. She was holding nothing, as she always seemed to be, hands free, unhurried. "Owen," she said. "Ambassador." She looked at me for a moment, then at the room, then back at me. "When I was a general," she said, "I once had a junior officer ask me what the goal of military power was. He expected me to say something about victory, or about deterrence, or about strategic advantage. Those are all correct answers. But I told him something different." A pause. "I told him the goal of military power is to arrive at the point where you no longer need to use it. Every weapon you build is a message to the future that says, we are working toward a day when this will not be necessary. The problem," she said, "is that you have to keep building them until that day actually arrives." She looked out at the stars. "I am not sure that day has arrived yet. But today," she said, "feels like progress." She left to speak with Vall, moving through the room with the quiet certainty of someone who had been moving toward this conversation for a very long time, and was in no hurry now that it had begun. I stood with Grace and my tea, and watched the room, and thought about the morning. A misrouted document, an archivist with amber eyes who had followed protocol, a list of categories that had turned a routine archive into an emergency session, into a full council convening, into a unanimous vote, and an accepted proposal, and a handshake between two species who were very different and very cautious, and had, today, decided to trust each other a little more than they had yesterday. I thought about Thessavar's question in the anteroom, "Do you believe that humanity will stop threatening itself?" I had given an honest answer. I had said we were trying. I had said we had failed before. I had said I did not think we would stop trying. Standing in that room, watching Marin discuss Section 4 of the framework with a Kareth legal expert, watching Ailey exchange careful, color-coded conversation with the Yeln delegate Laven, watching Ambassador CO sit across from Director Vall with the data card between them like the beginning of a very long and very necessary conversation, I still believed that answer was the right one. We were trying. We had always been trying. We had built machines to remind ourselves and each other what it cost not to try. And the machines had worked, imperfectly and expensively and sometimes barely, but they had worked, and we were still here, still in the room, still reaching for something that might be called peace, if you were patient enough with the definition. A Keth aide appeared in the doorway and spoke quietly to one of the other aides, and both of them glanced across the room at me, briefly, with an expression I was not familiar with. Not the guarded curiosity I had seen from Keth before. Something slightly different. something that it took me a moment to identify. Respect. Not the formal, procedural respect of diplomatic protocol, the other kind. The kind that happens when someone changes the shape of your understanding of something, and you are still adjusting to the new shape. The aide caught me noticing and looked away. I looked away too. Grace set down her empty cup and straightened her jacket. "Amendment session scheduled for Monday," she said. "The Framework Review Committee will include 2 human liaisons. I am nominating you for the second seat." I assumed you would. You assumed correctly. She looked at me sideways. "How are you feeling?" I considered the question genuinely. I had started the day unable to sleep, lying on my bunk listening to the station hum. I had spent the morning explaining to 12 species the full extent of what humanity had built over 4,000 years of conflict and survival. I had read numbers into the record that had made peer delegates change color, and Keth officers go still, and Yeln archivists reach across benches to offer wordless comfort. I had watched Ambassador Seo place 9 years of quiet, patient work onto a table and have it accepted. "I feel," I said slowly, "like something changed today, and like that is probably a good thing, even though it is going to be a lot of work." "It is absolutely going to be a lot of work," Grace agreed. "That is usually how good things are." She picked up her datapad and moved toward the door. I took a final look at the room, the delegates still talking, the stars above the ceiling, the blue curtain nebula almost fully gone around the curve of the station's rotation, leaving behind a sky full of unremarkable and ordinary light. I had one last thought, standing there, that I did not say aloud but that felt true. We came to the stars the way we had always come to new places, without knowing exactly what we were walking into, carrying everything we had learned from the last time and the time before that, still arguing among ourselves about what we were and what we wanted to be. We were not the most elegant species in this station. We were not the oldest, or the most advanced, or the most certain. We were loud and sentimental, and capable of extraordinary things, both good and terrible, and we had 4,000 years of complicated history packed into us like compressed fuel. But we had also shown up. We had sat in the rooms and told the truth and passed the proposal and meant it. That was not nothing. In fact, when I thought about it properly, standing in that room with my empty teacup and the stars outside, and the sound of 12 species talking cautiously and carefully toward something better than what they had started with this morning, it felt like quite a lot. I walked out of the chamber, into the corridor, and went to start on the paperwork for the amendment sessions. There was, as Grace had correctly noted, going to be a great deal of work. I found that I did not mind.